Hello everyone and welcome to Frag Fighter training. My name is Sienna and I am a conservation technician with the Land Between charity. And today I'm going to be taking you through part 2 of Frag Fighter training, which is Phragmites removal. Part 1 of this training, which covers how to survey for and report stands of invasive Phragmites, is available in a separate presentation which can be found on the Land Between website. Alright, so first just a brief outline of everything we're going to cover in this presentation. First, we'll go over what exactly is involved in Phragmites removal. Then we'll go over what is included in your Frag Fighter package, which you receive via email when you register as a Frag Fighter on the website. Then we'll go over just a bit of general knowledge about invasive Phragmites, what it is, what it looks like, and what are some of the problems that it causes. Then we'll go over some safety that we'd like you to keep in mind when you're removing Phragmites. We'll go over everything that you'll need to effectively remove your stand. We'll go over the spading schedule, so that's the rough schedule we'd like you and your team to keep when spading your stand throughout the season. Then we will go over the technique that we're going to be using in this protocol, and then a list of things that we definitely want to avoid doing to the best of our abilities when we're fighting frag. And then lastly, we'll go over the actual removal procedure. So, what exactly does removing invasive Phragmites involve? Essentially, it involves being assigned a stand, an invasive Phragmites stand, or stands, depending on how ambitious you and your team are feeling. And then spading your assigned stand 1 to 3 times throughout the season during specified time windows, which we'll go over. And then disposing of that plant material that you remove from the site properly and responsibly. And we'll go over how to do every aspect of this in this presentation. Participation in this invasive Phragmites removal program also comes with some minimum time commitments that we ask you to keep. So first, seasonally, a minimum commitment of 3 months, which is 1 removal season, is required. And this is to allow enough time for your assigned stand to be spaded up to 3 times, as well as enough time to ensure that the material you remove from the site can be properly disposed of. Next, a daily time commitment of approximately half a day is required for each removal day. Half a day to remove your stand each time is just an estimate. The amount of time to spade your stand will vary depending on its size, how dense it is, the number of people who are on your removal team, as well as if the stand has been spaded before in the season. But as an example, a dense stand that's about 4 by 4 meters in area would take 4 adults about 2 hours to remove. And we will be prioritizing the removal of stands that are 4 by 4 meters or less in size, so your assigned stand likely won't be larger than this. So you can use that as kind of a way to estimate how long it might take you each time. However, if it won't be possible for you and your team to completely remove your stand in 1 day, you can complete your removal efforts over 2 consecutive days if need be. And then finally, in terms of a continued commitment to the removal of your stand, we would really appreciate as much of a commitment as you can give us, or we'd appreciate you coming back every year, because in order for removal efforts to be effective, each stand of invasive Phragmites needs to be spaded multiple times a year for at least 4 years, likely more. And then in addition to that, the stands will need to be monitored for several years after the removal is completed to ensure that invasive Phragmites does not reemerge. This is a very highly invasive plant, and it's very difficult to remove. So it will take several years to be effective using these methods. So we'd really appreciate having you come back year to year, but of course it's not required to participate this season. Okay, next we'll go over what will be included in your Frag Fighter package, which will be sent to you when you register as a Frag Fighter on the Land Between website. So included in your package will be a copy of the invasive Phragmites removal protocol, which is the document that this presentation is based on. It provides a step-by-step instructions on each aspect of the removal process, an overview of the safety, pretty much everything you'll need to effectively remove your stand. You will also be sent a data sheet that you'll fill out with specific information related to your site as you undergo the removal process. You will also be sent a stand information sheet. This document will have information regarding the location and size of your stand, as well as other relevant information that might help you prepare for its removal. You will also be sent a general safety sheet with some basic information about things to watch out for while you're working outdoors, including ticks, poisonous plants, and so on. And then finally, you will also be sent a copy of the Guide to Identifying Native and Non-Native Phragmites australis. This guide outlines the best ways to distinguish between native and non-native Phragmites with clear pictures of each of the distinguishing features. This is really more for your reference and interest, as your assigned stand will have already been confirmed to be invasive Phragmites, but it's just good info to have, and you can refer back to it later. So, now just a little bit about invasive Phragmites. Invasive Phragmites has been named Canada's worst invasive species by Agriculture and Agri-Foods Canada. It's a perennial grass that's found across southern Ontario and the land between, and as far north as Sudbury. It's most commonly found growing on beaches or in or near wetlands and roadside ditches. And it tends to invade more disturbed areas like the sides of roads first, and then invade less disturbed areas once it's established itself in a more disturbed area. It grows very aggressively, completely displacing all native plants and the animals that depend on them, and forms dense stands of only Phragmites. It can grow to be up to 5 meters tall, but most of its mass is actually made up of its roots, which are called rhizomes, which account for about 80% of the total mass of the plant. So, as dominating and imposing as it is above ground, most of its mass is actually below the soil. The plant grows throughout the season, but it's most active from about May to August. And the dead standing stalks of the previous year's growth remain standing through the winter and for previous growing seasons, basically until something knocks it over. And then it spreads and invades into new areas, either by rhizome growth into that area, so its roots spread into a new area and it sends up stalks from those roots, or through rhizome fragments, which can spread as a result of damage to the stand and the subsequent improper handling and disposal of the plant material that's generated. Because a new stand of Phragmites can start from a very small rhizome fragment. Okay, now a little bit about how to identify invasive Phragmites. Generally, it is a large grass species that can, again, reach a height of up to about 5 meters tall, and that grows in dense patches where it's likely the only thing growing. It has broad, flat leaf blades that start about halfway up the stem, and it has a purple or light yellow plume or tuft at the end of each stalk. So that's that seed head that we're going to be talking about quite a bit in the next little while. It can be confused with its close relative, the native form of Phragmites, but there are a few ways to tell them apart. We go into the specifics of how to distinguish between native and non-native Phragmites in our Phragmites surveying webinar, if you're interested in learning more about this. And you can find that webinar on the Land Between website. But because the stands that you'll be assigned will have already been confirmed to be invasive Phragmites, you don't need to worry too much about how to tell them apart. Okay, and for the last section of our invasive Phragmites 101 portion of this presentation, we'll just go over some of the impacts that invasive Phragmites can have on the natural environment, human health, and the economy. First, invasive Phragmites can result in an increased flood risk in some areas. That's because its dense root growth, like we talked about 80% of the plant is underground, is made up by that root mass. That dense root growth can block water channels and slow or divert water runoff, which can result in increased flooding. Invasive Phragmites can also have a devastating impact on the biodiversity of an area, as it completely outcompetes nearly all native vegetation, which in turn makes an area unsuitable habitat for the animals, insects, fish, and other life that relied on that native vegetation base to make that habitat suitable for them. Invasive Phragmites can also have a direct impact on humans. It can grow so densely and tall that it actually completely blocks waterfront access, impeding humans' ability to enjoy their lakefront property or what have you. It can also pose a significant threat to human health as it grows so tall, again, about 5 meters. It can block road visibility, posing some significant dangers there. And there's also a significant cost associated with it. It's been found that nearly $3 million a year is spent by Ontario municipalities on managing invasive Phragmites, so that's removal, education, identification, things like that. An additional $350,000 is spent for management by conservation authorities. So invasive Phragmites has a significant impact on various aspects of life. Okay, so next we'll just go into a few safety concerns and measures that we like you to be aware of when you're removing your stand of invasive Phragmites. So first, just generally, Phragmites removal can be strenuous, labor-intensive, and involve working outdoors for multiple hours at a time. So we ask that you please know your limits and pay attention to your body's signals. Don't overdo it. Be sure that you take frequent breaks in the shade and drink plenty of water. Ensure that you have packed enough food and water to last you for the day. We also ask that you wear appropriate clothes for the tasks. So that to us means heavy-soled shoes, eye protection, both from the sun and any plant parts that might be flying places, gardening gloves to protect your hands, pants, and a long sleeve shirt. And the reason we ask for pants and a long sleeve shirt and gloves is because the leaves of invasive Phragmites have serrated edges that can cut and irritate the skin. So you want as much of your skin to be covered as possible. We also recommend that you dress for the weather. So that means sunscreen, a hat, sunglasses, bug repellent or bug jacket are all strongly recommended. Also, if it's raining, bring a raincoat, whatever you need to be comfortable outside for multiple hours at a time. And then we also ask that you don't remove invasive Phragmites in inclement weather. So if it's raining heavily, if it's very windy, if it's going to be extremely hot or cold, just wait and do it another day. Wait till you have better weather. Okay, next, some safety with regards to working near roads. First and foremost, we ask that you be vigilant and alert at all times. Pay attention to oncoming traffic and make sure you're wearing a high-vis vest when you're working near the road. We also ask that you don't work on the side of the road unless you have permission to do so. And if you park on the side of the road, ensure that your car is as far off the road as is safe to do so. So outside the white lines at least, if the road has white lines. Next, a little bit of safety regarding the tools you will be using. So you're going to be using sharp spades and pruners to remove invasive Phragmites stands. So care and caution are strongly recommended when you're using these things. And then also when you're not using your spade, we ask that you ensure that you lay it down in a safe location. Don't stick it into the ground. So make sure you lay it somewhere out of the way so no one will accidentally step on it and you won't lose it in the vegetation. And then lastly, some safety regarding disposing of invasive Phragmites. If you have elected to burn the stems of invasive Phragmites to get rid of them, and we'll be going over the various methods that you can use to dispose of it properly. But if you've elected to be burning it, we ask that you only do so if and when it's permitted in your area. And then if you are going to do it and it is permitted in your area, we ask that you use caution when you're working around the flames and ensure that you have the ability to properly contain the fire. So that means burning it in a controlled setting, either in a burn barrel or in some other way that you keep it small and contained. Okay, next we will go over everything that you will need in order to effectively be able to remove your stand of invasive Phragmites. So first and foremost, you will need one sharp spade per person, so something that looks like this. You will also need one pair of pruners per person. That's what you'll use to remove the seed heads if there are any. You will also need paper yard waste bags, black plastic garbage bags, and potentially some other kind of garbage bags. And I include that in there and I say if required, because if you are able to dispose of your invasive Phragmites material at a municipal invasive species disposal site, and we'll go over again all of the disposal options. But if you can bring it to a municipal site, you might be required to collect the plant material in a specific type of bag because some municipalities specify what kind of bag they'd like it in. So if that option is available to you, we ask that you please contact the disposal site and see if they have a specific type of bag that they want the stuff collected in. If not, you can use whatever kind of bag you like, but I just add that in there just so you're aware. You will also need a camera or a phone with a camera, a handheld GPS or just a phone with a GPS. I think most phones have GPSs nowadays. You'll need a tape measure, a clipboard, a pen or a pencil, a calculator, or just the calculator on your phone is also fine. We're not going to be doing any kind of scary math. You will also need, if you like, a handheld tally counter, so something that looks like this. At one point in the protocol, we're going to be asking you to keep track of how many stems of invasive Phragmites were in your stand, so you'll be counting them as you cut them. And something like this can make that process easier, but we're also going to provide a space in your data sheet where you can just keep a hand tally with a pen if that works for you, whatever you prefer. You will also need your stand information sheet, which will be sent to you when you register as a removal volunteer. You will need a copy of the invasive Phragmites removal protocol, which will look like this. You will need your field data sheet. You'll also need some stiff brushes or a hand broom or something that you can use to brush off your clothes, shoes, and equipment when you're done for the day. You may also need burn barrels, again, if you're going to be using the burning option to dispose of the invasive Phragmites, then you might want a burn barrel so that you can contain your burning efforts. You will also need a first aid kit just in case. You'll need extra water for cleaning your shoes and equipment at the end of the day, so some water that's set aside for cleaning, not just for drinking. And then finally, you will need either a car or cars that have enough space to transport the invasive Phragmites material away from the removal site. You'll also need some personal equipment, which includes a pair of work gloves, some heavy-soled shoes, sunscreen, a change of shoes so that you can change your shoes at the end of the day and avoid any chance of tracking any plant material away from the site. Like we talked about, you'll also want a long sleeve shirt and pants. You might want a bug jacket or some bug spray, a sun hat, and protective eyewear. Definitely going to want water and snacks. Your cell phone just for safety purposes, and its charger potentially, just in case you're out there for a while. And then your high visibility vest if you're going to be working anywhere near a road. And even if you're not, it's not a bad idea to be wearing that just in case. Okay, so as I mentioned, we will be asking you to spade your stand within specific time windows throughout the season. This is to ensure that your removal efforts are as effective as possible because spading invasive Phragmites at different times of the year can have very different impacts. So first I'll go over the ideal scenario in which you and your team are able to spade your stand multiple times throughout the year. And then I'll go over another option, which is only spading your stand once. Both of these options require that the stands be cut at a very specific time though. So again, even if you're only going to be cutting it once, it does need to happen within a pretty specific time window. So we'll go over both of these schedules. Okay, so first, this schedule outlines the ideal scenario in which you and your team are able to spade your stand at least twice throughout the season, with the potential to undertake a third spading if you and your team are willing and able, and if you're available. So if you and your team are willing, you can spade your stand for the first time in mid-June. So you'll see here it's marked as optional, and this is because spading at this time would be beneficial. It would help reduce the size of your stand, but it's not absolutely necessary. So if you can start in mid-June, do your second spading in mid-July, and then do your third spading in mid-August. But if you and your team won't be able to spade your stand already in June, that's totally fine. You can do your first spade in mid-July and your second spade in mid-August. And that will be your spading schedule for the year. Again, if you're using the multiple cut scenario, we ask that you only cut in these specified windows because cutting at different times of the year can actually do more harm than good. So we really do ask that you stick to these time windows. But again, the mid-June cut is up to you and your team. So the second scenario, if it will only be possible for you and your team to spade your assigned stand once during the growing season, It is strongly recommended that it be done when the seed heads, which are those plume-like structures, these things here, which you can see here, when those seed heads are just beginning to emerge. And this will likely occur sometime between mid-July and mid-August, depending on where within the land between your stand is located. So if you're further north, it might be a bit later. If you're further south, it might be a bit earlier. So in order for you and your team to be able to time your spading appropriately, we recommend that one or two of your members of your team be assigned as pre-removal surveyors to monitor the stand for seed head emergence so that you can determine when the best time will be to remove the stand. Please note that dead standing stems, so those stems that were produced in previous years, may be present at your site and may have exposed seed heads. But to determine the best time to spade your stand, we would like you to look for seed heads on the new stems, so those green stems, so the stems that were produced this year. We don't look for seed heads on the dead standing stems because they'll be there already in the spring, or they're there in the winter. Look for the emergence of seed heads on new stems produced this year. And I'll just say it one more time. Cutting your stand at the wrong time can do more harm than good. So for this reason, we're asking that you adhere to the timing recommendations outlined in this section. If you're only going to cut once, please make sure that you're only doing it in that mid-July to mid-August window, whenever the seed heads are beginning to emerge. Because if you do it too early and you only spade it once, you won't do as much damage, you won't get as much bang for your buck as we would like. And if you wait too long, they might have already set seed and released them. Okay, next we'll go over the actual spading technique that we'd like you to use when you're removing your stand of invasive Phragmites. So step number 1, if there are seed heads present, so again, that's those plume-like structures. If there are seed heads present on either live or dead standing stalks, so those stalks produced in previous years, we would like you to remove them first. So to do this, we'd like you to place a dark plastic bag over the seed head and clip them into the bag using a set of pruners. If the stalk is really tall, you can kind of grab it and bend it over into the bag if need be. If it's not that tall, you can just place the bag right on top and cut it in. And then we'll go over how to properly dispose of the seed heads in the disposal section of this presentation. If there are no seed heads present, or after the seed heads have been removed, you can begin spading the stems of invasive Phragmites. And to do that, we're going to take you step by step through the technique because it's pretty technical, but once you do it a couple times, you'll get used to it, but we'll break it down step by step for you here. So step 1 broadly is to properly position your spade. So to do that, we would like you to place the blade of your spade, so this part of the spade here, on the ground about 2 to 5 centimeters from the base of the stem. So the blade of your spade about 2 to 5 centimeters from the base of your stem. We'd also like you to position your spade so that the angle between the blade, so here, and the stem is about 45 degrees. So it's hard to, communicate a 3D image and a 2D image, but essentially the angle between the sharp part of your shovel and the stem should be about 45 degrees. You don't need to be out there with a protractor or anything, but you can kind of envision what that is. So if this here is 90 degrees, right from here, like this angle is 90, then half of that is 45, if that helps you. Okay, so after your blade is properly positioned, with your foot, you can go ahead and push the spade at least 5 centimeters into the ground so that you actually end up cutting the stem below the ground, like you can see here. So you're going to push the spade about 5 centimeters on that angle that you put it at and cut it below the stem, so about here, or below the ground. So you'll end up cutting it about here. After you cut it, we ask that you remove your spade from the ground at that same 45-degree angle that you pushed it into the ground. So just pull it out at the same angle. Don't jiggle it around in the soil or anything like that. Just pull it straight out at that same angle. And then with your free hand, you can remove the stalk from the ground, and being super careful not to disturb the surrounding soil as to the best of your abilities. And we're going to go over why we want to avoid soil disturbance in the next slide. But essentially, that is the spading technique. Okay, lastly, just before we get into the procedure part of this presentation, I'm going to go over what we're calling the please don't list. So throughout the process of invasive Phragmites removal, it's important that the things on this list be avoided to the best of your abilities. As I'm sure you all know, or you have now learned, invasive Phragmites grows incredibly persistently and aggressively, so any and all actions that can result in its additional spread or growth should be avoided. So that's all these things on this list. So first, please don't disturb the soil during the removal process because soil disturbance can actually stimulate the growth of invasive Phragmites rhizomes. And so we should try to minimize that as much as possible. Please also don't dig the plants out of the ground. That kind of goes part and parcel with the don't disturb the soil. Because by digging the plants out of the ground, you will be disturbing the soil. And again, that can stimulate growth. So we'd like to avoid that. Please also don't harm or disturb any native plants that might be present in or near your stand. We want to leave as much native vegetation intact at the site as possible so that these plants can then take over the area after the invasive Phragmites has been removed. We also want to do our best to make sure that we don't let any plant material get away. So we want to make sure that we're collecting it all, every single thing that we're cutting, the seed heads, the stems, everything. We want to make sure it ends up in a bag because leaving any kind of plant material behind could result in it being blown into a different area by the wind, and then we have a whole new stand on our hands, and we definitely want to avoid that. Please also don't compost invasive Phragmites. Like I said, we're going to go over how to properly dispose of it, but you definitely don't want to be composting it because invasive Phragmites can sprout and form new populations in the area where it's composted. So again, we'll go over how to properly dispose of it. And then lastly, again, going hand in hand with what we just said, please don't dispose of invasive Phragmites improperly. Again, we'll go over how to do it properly, but improper disposal can just make the problem 10 times worse. So we definitely want to avoid that as much as possible. Okay, now we're ready to get into the actual procedure portion of this presentation. So as you can see, the procedure is broken down into 8 parts or steps. 8 seems like a lot, but remember we're doing this over 3 months, and some of these steps, for example, step number 2 and step number 4 are only done the first time you remove your stand. So if you're spading it multiple times throughout the year, you only have to do step 2 and 4 the first time. So it's not too bad. Okay, so part 1 of the procedure is the planning portion. So this portion of the protocol should take place in advance of the day that you're planning to remove your stand. So if you're planning to cut your stand on, July 14th, then this part of the procedure should take place about a week in advance, just so you have enough time to do everything that's necessary. So whether this is the first, second, or third time you're planning to spade your stand will impact what you need to do in the planning portion of the protocol. So as you can see in this flow chart, if this is the first time you're planning on spading your stand, we're going to have you go to chart A. And if it's the second or third time you're spading your stand, we're going to have you go to chart B. These charts are included in the protocol document that you'll be sent in your volunteer package. And we're also going to go through them step by step here. So, if this is the first time you're planning to spade your stand in the season, you'll be pushed to use chart A, which we'll work through now. I'll just take this time to point out these flags here, these blue flags. Those are to refer you to relevant sections of the protocol. So anything, say, in this box here, if you need further clarification or more information, you can refer to section G of the protocol, and you'll have more information there. Same here, you can refer to section E, and so on. Okay, so you're in the planning portion of the protocol. This is the first time you're planning to spade your stand this season. The first question you need to ask yourself is, are you planning to spade your stand multiple times throughout the season or just once? So first, let's say we're only going to spade it once. So the first thing you need to do is assign 1 or 2 members of your team to monitor the stand for seed head emergence. So like we talked about in the ID section, the seed heads are those plume-like, those little poofy structures that form at the top of the stem. So you need to assign somebody in your team to monitor your stand and see when that emergence is happening. Because remember, that's the best time to spade the stand if you're only going to do it once. And it says this will likely occur sometime between mid-July and mid-August. Again, depending on where in the land between you are, it might be closer to the July side, it might be closer to the August side. It depends where you are. Okay, after you've done that, when the seed heads are beginning to emerge, decide on a date and time to spade the stand. So once the scouting team members of your team have found that the seed heads are starting to emerge on that new growth, then within your team you can decide a time when you're all available to go and spade that stand. Again, relatively soon after that seed head emergence starts. Okay, and then regardless of if you're only spading it once or if you're spading it multiple times, you would move on to this section. Again, in your protocol, it's one continuous flow chart, but I just broke it up for this so it could fit on this slide. But this section here brings you to this arrow here. So then the next step is to gather the necessary supplies. So that's everything from that list, which is in section E of your protocol, but it's that list of what you will need that we went over. And then you want to gather the appropriate amount of yard waste bags, black plastic bags, and other garbage bags based on the estimated area of your assigned stand. So in your stand information sheet that's included in your volunteer package, there will be an indicator of the approximate area of the stand that you're going to be removing. That was made by the person who reported the stand initially. So based on that, you can kind of make a guesstimate as to the amount of bags and things that you'll need to collect all of the material. Okay, and then the next step, if you like, you can assign roles within your frag fighting team ahead of the removal day. Included in section G of the protocol is a list of some of those potential roles. You by no means do you have to divide the labor like this. It's just a suggestion and just kind of so that you're aware of all of the jobs that need to be done. We don't cover all of those roles in this presentation, but they're listed very clearly in your protocol document. So you can take a look at those and decide if you want to, assign one person as the primary seed head cutter, and you can assign another person as the primary, stem collector and counter. But if you don't want to assign roles ahead of time, that's totally fine. And then after you've taken all these steps, you will continue to part 2 of the procedure, which we're going to go over in a bit. Okay, so if this is the second or third time you're planning to spade your stand, you're going to use chart B. So if this is the second or third time you're spading your stand, within your team, decide on a date and time, again within the windows of time outlined in the spading schedule that we went over, to spade the stand. Gather the necessary supplies, and then here the only change is you can gather the amount of bags that you need you can figure out how many bags you'll need based on how many you needed the first time or second time that you spaded the stand. And then again, if you like, you can assign roles within your team. And then the big difference here is if you've already spaded your stand once or twice, then you're going to move on to part 3 of the procedure. Whereas if it was the first time you're spading the stand, remember you move to part 2 of the procedure. Just a few more notes about part 1 before we move on. You and your team should plan to meet on a day when the weather will be good, so not too rainy, not windy, not too hot, not too cold, and also on a day when everyone can devote enough time to spade the entire stand. But like we said, if for whatever reason the stand can't be completely removed in one day, maybe the weather turned for the worst, or you just can't find a day that everybody has enough time, that's no big deal. The stand can be removed over 2 consecutive days. So if you can't decide on a day when everyone's free for enough time, pick a time when everyone's free for 2 days back to back. And then lastly, we also encourage you to, for you and your team to discuss and decide how you're going to be disposing of the Phragmites you remove from your site, because your chosen disposal method will impact the removal procedure, specifically by affecting what type of bag you use to collect the Phragmites material. And again, I know I keep saying this, but we're going to go over all of the disposal methods, and you'll see that the type of bag you collect the stems in will differ depending on how you're going to dispose of it. So if you plan in advance, you won't have to move the material from one type of bag to the other. So good idea to plan that in advance. Okay, part 2 of the procedure is estimating stand area. Again, this only needs to be done the first time you're spading your stand in the season, so if this is the second or third time, you can skip this step and move on to part 3. Step 1 in estimating stand area is to make sure that you have permission to be at your site. So that permission will either be secured by us, the land between, or by you, depending on the situation. But regardless, just make sure you have permission to be what you're doing, where you're doing it. Step 2 is to fill in the information in Table A of the datasheet. So that is your team name, the members of the team, names of the team members, the date, the stand location, block number, which will be provided to you on your stand information sheet, so don't worry about that, the stand location in latitude and longitude, the spade number. So again, if this is the first time your stand is being spaded this year, you'd circle 1. If it was the second time, 2, and so on. The year the stand was first cut, that will be filled in by us, but chances are it will be 2020. The number of years the stand has been cut, again, that will be we'll fill that in for you before we send you the sheets. And then has a photo, just a prompt to make sure that you take a photo of the stand before you start the removal process and then after you start the removal process. So that should be a yes for both of them. This is just a prompt to remind you. Okay, step 3 is using a tape measure, measure the approximate length and width of the stand. And the way we're going to do this is by approximating the measurement and by assuming that the stand is roughly rectangular in shape. So no stand of Phragmites is going to be a perfect square or rectangle, of course. That would be too easy. But what we're going to do is, guesstimate what the area is just by assuming that it's roughly shaped like a rectangle. So for example, if your stand kind of looks like this, you can kind of draw an imaginary rectangle in your mind and then measure the width and length of that rectangle. Another example, if your stand is more shaped like this, you can draw kind of a rectangle around the bottom half of this half moon stand. And the reason that's okay is because, yes, you have some empty space here and you're cutting out these chunks, but this empty space will account for this chunk that you're leaving out. So you'll get a pretty good estimate of the area that way. So you'll measure the length and width of your the approximate length and width of your stand and record those values in Table B of the datasheet. So measured length, measured width. And then step 4 is to calculate the approximate area of the stand. And the way you do that is just by multiplying the measured length by the measured width. So say the length was about 4 meters and the width was about 2 meters. 4 times 2 would be 8 meters squared, and you would put that area in section D of this table here. Now you'll also notice that there is a space in this box for the stand area estimate before measuring. That's included in your stand information sheet. And I mentioned previously that in order to estimate the number of bags you'll need, you can use this value, this estimated area, to kind of make a guess as to the amount that you might need. So you're probably thinking, well, if we already kind of have an estimate of what the area is, why do I have to measure it? And this is because estimating stand area without measuring is notoriously difficult. We as humans are just not very good at estimating area. So yes, an estimate was already made, but when the person was reporting the stand, they weren't making any kind of measurements. So it was just kind of their best guess, which is probably quite good, but we would like it to be a bit more exact. So that's why we're asking you to make these measurements. Okay, so part 3 of the procedure is the actual removal of the Phragmites. So step 1 in this part is to, again, make sure you have permission to be at your site. Throw this in there because you might be skipping step number 2, so I just want to remind you to make sure that you have permission to be there. Step number 2 is to fill in Table A of the datasheet, so that's that one that we went over in the last slide with your team name, the members' names, the team members' names, the date, the time, stuff like that. Step number 3 is to take a photo of the stand, and we really want to make sure you're doing this before you begin so we can get a clear picture of what it looks like before you start your removal efforts. And we'd also like you to please include something in the photo that can demonstrate stand. So either have a person be in the picture or your shovel or something like that that can demonstrate stand. and try to capture as much of the stand in one photo as possible. Okay, step number 4 is to remove all the seed heads first. So if there are seed heads present on either new stems produced this year, so the ones that are still alive, or dead standing stems, we want all of those seed heads removed first. And to do that, you're going to place a dark plastic bag over the seed heads and clip them into the bag using a set of pruners. Again, like we talked about, if the stalk is very tall, you can kind of gently bend it over so that the seed head can reach into the bag if need be. And again, please remove all of the seed heads before you start cutting, just to avoid the potential for any spreading of the seeds while you're undertaking your removal efforts. Okay, step 4, after all of the seed heads have been removed, is to begin spading the stems. And we'd like you to work from the outside of the stand in. Please don't push your way into the middle of the stand and get buried in there and then try to cut your way out. We'd like you to work from the outside in. And we'd also like you to be cutting both the, again, the live stems, the stems that were produced this year, and the dead standing stems produced in previous years. And we're going to be using that cutting technique, that spading technique that we went over in previous slides. That's demonstrated by this image here. So spade about 2 to 5 centimeters from the stem at a 45-degree angle from the stem, and then pushing that spade about 5 centimeters into the ground to cut the stem below the ground. Again, if you want to go over again the specifics of that technique, you can slide back to that previous slide. And then after you cut each stem using that technique, you're going to carefully remove each stem from the ground, being careful not to disturb the soil as you do, because we're just trying to minimize any, stimulating any growth of the rhizome mass underneath. Then you are going to fold the stem into a bundle and collect it into a bag. And the reason we're asking you to fold it into a bundle is just to leave as much space in the bag as possible so you can fill it up as much as you can, but also to prevent the stems from poking through the bag. Because again, we don't want the material to be spreading everywhere, and you don't want your bag to be full of holes. The type of bag, like I said, that you collect the stems in will depend on the disposal method that you've decided to use. So we made this flowchart just to kind of help you decide what kind of bag to collect the stems in. So if you're going to be disposing of the stems at a designated municipal disposal site, you're going to collect the stems in whatever type of bag that the municipality asks you to. So it could be clear plastic, it could be dark plastic, it could be yard waste, whatever they specifically ask you to do. And if they don't make a specification, then you can use whichever kind of bag you like. If you're going to be disposing of the invasive Phragmites via burning, you need to collect the stems in brown yard waste bags, because that's how you'll be drying them in those bags, and they'll dry. They won't dry if you collect them in plastic bags. So if you're going to be burning it, collect them in yard waste bags. And then finally, if you're going to be disposing of it via decomposition, you want to collect the stems in black plastic garbage bags, because like we'll go over, you're going to tie up those bags and leave them in the sun and just let the material rot. And that plastic will keep all the moisture in. So decide in advance what kind of bag you're going to be using to collect your material. Okay, and then if this is the first time the stand is being cut this season, we're also going to ask you to count the stems as they're removed. So we want to know how many individual stems were in the stand. So each time you cut one, we'd like someone to be keeping track of the tally of number of stems cut. So you can either do that in table C of the data sheet, which will look like this, and we've left you a big space so you can just keep a tally if you like, or you can use that handheld tally counter that we talked about when we were going over the list of things that you'll need. Whatever works for you, whatever will be easiest for you to keep track. And then we've also left a space here for you to write the final number of stems that were removed. But again, if this is the second or third time you're cutting the stand this season, then you don't need to keep track and you can skip this step. Okay, and then essentially you're going to repeat steps 4 through 8 until all of the stems have been removed. So you keep cutting, carefully removing, placing in a bag, and counting until the entire stand is removed. Okay, and the last step in the removal process is to take a photo of the area after the stems have been removed. And again, including something in the photo to show scale. So either a person or um, a shovel, whatever you used in the photo of the stand before you cut it, use that same object to show scale again. And then there will be another flowchart in the protocol asking you if this is the first time the stand is being cut this year or not. If it is, you're going to continue on to part 4, and if it's not, like if you've cut it once or twice before, then you can skip part 4 and move on to part 5. So part 4 of the procedure is to calculate the approximate density of the stand. So the approximate number of stems in the stand per a given unit of area. So to do so, we're going to have you divide the total number of stems that were removed by the calculated estimate of the stand area. So for example, let's say the person who was counting the number of stems that were removed found that there were 567 stems in the stand. And then in part 2, we calculated that the approximate area of the stand was about 7.35 meters squared. To find the approximate density of the stand, we just need to divide 567 by 7.35, which gives us this super long number, 77.14, blah, 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 blah. And we don't need all of those digits. We're going to ask you to please round that answer to 2 decimal places. So you could round this to a stem density of 77.14 stems per meter squared. So again, you don't even need to worry about the units or anything like that. Just divide the number of stems that were removed by the total area of the stand that you calculated in part 2. And then we'd like you to please record the value that you calculate in table D of the data sheet. Okay, part 5 of the protocol is the decontamination section. All these decontamination measures should be taken at the removal site, just so that you're avoiding transporting any plant material away from the area. So when you're done for the day, number 1, please thoroughly brush off and or wash all of the tools, shoes, and clothes that were used or worn in the removal process. So make sure all of the dirt and plant material is off of your clothes and shoes and tools. And use that extra water that you packed to do any cleaning that you need to do. Okay, and then just before you leave the site, even if you think you got it all off of all of the things you're taking away, please just do a double check to make sure that nothing you'll be transporting away from the site has any dirt or plant material on it at all. And then when you are just about ready to leave the site for the day, we're going to ask you to please change into a different pair of shoes. Again, just to avoid any potential of tracking anything away. You have grooves in the bottom of your shoes that could hold stuff that you're just not aware of. So please change your shoes and make sure you're doing it in an area that's free of any mud or plant material. So you're not getting plant material on your now clean shoes, because that would defeat the purpose. Okay, part 6 of the procedure is the disposal of the plant material. This is the section I've been referring to all throughout this presentation, and it's finally here. So essentially you have 3 options to properly dispose of the invasive Phragmites. Number 1, if your municipality has a designated municipal site to dispose of invasive plants, that's fantastic. Lucky you, you can take all the plant material there to dispose of it. Like I mentioned though, these places are not very common, but again, if you're lucky enough to have access to one, that's great. If you don't have access to a municipal site, you can dry and burn the stems if you like, or you can decompose them. So we're going to ask you to please choose the method that is best suited to your situation and your location. But regardless of the method that you choose, we're really going to ask you to not take any shortcuts in the proper disposal of Phragmites, regardless of the method that you choose, because improper disposal can make the problem even worse than had it not been removed in the first place at all. So please, whatever method you choose, please follow the steps that we're going to go over here. Okay, option 1 is disposal at a designated municipal site for invasive plants. Like I said, not very common, but if you have this option, fantastic. It's the easiest way to do it. But regardless of the method you're choosing, we're asking that you make sure that you're still removing the seed heads first by clipping them into some kind of garbage bag, whatever is specified by the municipality, because we want to avoid spreading the seeds while we're undertaking our removal efforts. You're going to want to collect the stems in the type of bag required by the municipality. And then you're also just going to want to make sure that you securely close all of the bags before you transport, just to make sure no plant material is spreading all over the place in the transportation process. So by far the easiest option, if you have a designated location or if you're close by to one, this is definitely the way to go. If you don't have access to a designated location to dispose of invasive plants, then this could be an option for you, drying and burning. But this is only a viable disposal option if burning is allowed in the area that you live, if it's permitted, if there's no fire bans, anything like that. So be sure to look into that before you decide you're going to dispose of invasive Phragmites this way. So if you're going to go about disposing of it using the drying and burning option, again, we're going to ask that you make sure you remove the seed heads first and collect them in black plastic garbage bags. So again, clipping them into black plastic garbage bags first. And then to dispose of those seed heads, we're going to ask you to seal them in those black plastic bags and then leave the bags in the sun for a few weeks until the plant material is rotten. And then when the seed heads are rotten, then you can throw those bags in the regular garbage. To dispose of the stems, we're going to ask that you collect the stems in a paper yard waste bag from the removal site. So as you're clipping and folding them, put them into a brown yard waste bag. When you're done for the day, you're going to carefully transport those stems to the location where you're going to dry them. This location should be a covered area that's dry and, a place basically where you can leave them for several weeks at a time so that they can dry completely. And then once they are completely dry, again, if it's permitted in your area, there's no fire bans in effect, nothing like that, then you can burn the stems in small and controlled batches. So you can either use a burn barrel or some other way to contain the flames, again, doing it in small and controlled batches. And the third option for disposal, again, if your municipality doesn't have a designated spot and either there's a fire ban in effect or you'd just rather not burn the Phragmites, option 3 is disposing of it via decomposition. So if you're going to do it this way, again, we're going to ask you to make sure you remove the seed heads first and collect them in plastic bags. You're also going to collect the stems from the removal site in black plastic bags. So again, you're spading, you're folding them up, and you're going to collect them in a black plastic bag if you're disposing of them this way. You're then going to carefully transport the bags to the decomposition location. So this is where you're going to leave them for an extended period of time, so probably one of your team members' backyards. And again, you're going to make sure everything is all sealed up so that nothing is being spread in the transportation process. You are going to seal both sets of garbage bags, so both the ones with the seed heads and the stems, and leave them in the sun for several weeks until all of the plant material is rotten and no longer viable, no longer capable of sprouting new stands. And then when the material is rotten, then it can be thrown away in the regular garbage. Okay, and then part 7 is data and photo submission. So when you've completed your removal efforts for the day, please send us an email with the before and after photos of your site, as well as a photo or scanned copy of your data sheets. And you can send those to citizensciencetlb@gmail.com. And we'd also like to ask you to please include frag fighters somewhere in the subject line. So again, we'd like you to send in your data and photos after each removal day. Please don't wait until the end of the removal season. We'd like to sort through it all as you do it. And then you repeat. You repeat the steps outlined in the procedure according to the spading schedule that we went over closer towards the beginning of the presentation. So you repeat the necessary steps either 1, 2, or 3 times throughout the season, and then hopefully you have a lot of fun and it feels very rewarding and you keep on coming back year after year. Okay, and then lastly, the final part of the procedure is part 8, long-term commitment. So, like I've said, in order for a stand of invasive Phragmites to be effectively removed using these techniques, it needs to be spaded multiple times a year for several consecutive years. So the steps that we've gone over today um, in the protocol must be repeated for a minimum of 4 years, likely more. And then, in addition to that, each stand will also require ongoing monitoring for several years after our removal efforts are done to make sure that invasive Phragmites isn't reemerging in that area. So it's a tall order, and your continued commitment to the cause is very much appreciated. Any time you can give us is huge for us. But of course, it's not required that you sign, 4 years of your life away to us. But any time commitment that you can give us is huge and greatly appreciated. Okay, and that brings us to the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for taking the time to work through it. If you have any questions about the presentation or the Frag Fighters program in general, please don't hesitate to contact us. You can reach us by email at citizensciencetlb@gmail.com or by phone in the office at 705-457-1222.